I believe it's recording. Wonderful.
Great.
Well, thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me today. I've been kind of excited about it.
Tell us about your candidacy and what makes you the best candidate.
Okay. I've been looking at this for several years, and I started with the state of Illinois back under the Jim Edgar administration. When I came in '94, there was a surplus of money, and you had the ability not to just have anything you wanted, but when you needed something, the money was there to do it. And so I've watched us go from a place where we had what we needed to a place where we not only can't get what we need, but often we're begging for those things. And it's been because of mismanagement and just an attitude and of just corruption throughout the state. So watching that for the last 20 years made me kind of look at it and say, I know I can do better. I manage a $3.5 million budget with the Department of Corrections. I've owned my own business, and so I know that when we're looking at the problems that we've had in Illinois, especially here in Southern Illinois, I have the tools to be able to do a good job in working towards where we were 20 years ago under Jim Edgar. So in looking at that, the seat came open, and I said, I'm the best candidate for this seat. So jumped into the mix and been working hard ever since then.
What are the issues that you're focusing on?
For the state in general?
Yep.
Sure. Well, there are, I guess it's kind of threefold. Primarily, we need to cut taxes in Illinois and create an environment that causes businesses to want to come back to Illinois, to stay in Illinois, or to expand here in Illinois. The burdensome regulations that we've put on businesses have just basically caused them to leave the state or just say, I'm just not going to expand anymore. And then, of course, here in Southern Illinois in particular, education is a real issue. When we have kids in the Chicago school district where you may have 5 kids or 5 laptops to 1 kid, and here in Southern Illinois we have 5 children to 1 laptop. And so there's an inequity in education. And I think all three of those work together to be the main issues, not only for the entire state, but in particular here in Southern Illinois.
So how do those first two things go together? If we don't have the money that we need and we're going to cut taxes. We had the Republican gubernatorial candidate here a week ago kind of went through the same starting point and said we have to cut burdensome taxes, and then he went on to enumerate a broad range of services that aren't taxed that he wants to tax. So how do you, I'm not putting his words into your mouth,
right.
How do you sort of reconcile, okay, we don't have the money and we're going to cut taxes?
Well, I believe that when you cut taxes, you actually stimulate the economy. So we bring more businesses in, we encourage businesses to expand, and by doing that you broaden the tax base. But saying that we don't have the money and we need to increase taxes, I don't think is the answer, because if you decrease the number of jobs we have, then of course you decrease the revenue streams that we have as well. Before we talk about increasing taxes or keeping what should have been a temporary tax, we have to look at some of the areas that we really can control. And of course, we have massive fraud in the Medicaid system. In fact, we have people who are on the Medicaid rolls who no longer are alive. And so that money is being distributed somewhere. I would want to start first with a forensic audit. When we look at areas like the neighborhood recovery initiative, and you see that there's $52 million that was set aside, which we're now calling a slush fund. There's $52 million. In one sense, that could have almost kept the Murfreesboro boot camp open for another year. So doing a forensic audit takes care of a lot of things. It takes care of making sure that we find areas where there's corruption, where we have people who are inept, at what they're doing. We find areas that, where we have had wasteful spending and identify those. So when we work towards taking care of Medicaid fraud, we take care of doing the forensic audit, then we can look at some combining some places where we've had redundancy. There is some talk, of course, about combining the offices of treasurer and comptroller. There's some talk about doing away with the office of the lieutenant governor, and I think those are things we need to look at, as well as I think I mentioned in the debate. You know, there's the mosquito abatement, and I heard in a speech from another candidate a while back, DuPage and Cook County both have multiple mosquito abatement districts, and the mosquitoes don't know which district they live in. So, why couldn't you combine some of those? And those, that's just a handful of what we can do, but it gives you an idea of places to start.
So you would be a single lawmaker, and you would be working with others to accomplish these things? How does that all happen?
Well, you have to have a mindset of bringing people together who don't think 100% like you, but where you can find the areas that you do agree on. I served as the coordinator for coalitions for the Republican Party for a couple of years, and in doing that, often what you would have to do is you have an organization who has folks who want to be heard, and their issues can't always be resolved by only one side of the aisle. For instance, there was a woman here in Carbondale when the Community Correctional Center, the Glass House, was closing. She was an African-American woman, happened to be, she's kind of a mixed voter, but mostly Republican, and they were not going to have a job for her. One of the few wardens that they were not going to place someplace. So I made a phone call. This is Terri Bryant, I'm coordinator of coalitions, and reached out to Toy Hutchison. She is the leader of the Black Caucus in the House. And I said, look, I have an African-American woman here who needs to have a job. She's very skilled. Can you help? So I have a history of being a consensus builder. And that's what's needed in Springfield. So even as a single legislator, if you're a voice for your district and you can help other legislators understand why you need something for your district, sometimes that can happen. There was I was with Senator John O. Jones and Senator Sue Resin one day when Senator John O. Wanted, I can't remember what, it was a coal issue, I think, for Jefferson County. And Sue Resin didn't really understand why John O. needed that. John O. didn't really understand why Sue didn't want to do that. And so they were able to talk things over until they were able to both understand what each other's needs were. So communication is one of my best skills. I've learned it in corrections. You have to be able to get an individual who maybe is doing 600 years to do what he doesn't want to do and has no motivation to do it, and to work in your direction and not get punched in the eye while it happens. So.
But you mentioned a forensic audit. I'm not clear on exactly what a forensic audit is versus regular audit. And realistically, what do you think you might identify as waste, fraud, and ineptness? What's the dollar figure?
I don't know if I could put a dollar figure on it because we haven't done the audit. But in my mind, a forensic audit means just not doing it peripherally. Because we need to be line by line. Look at every single line and see if there is waste in that area. And when we're talking about a particular kind of waste, I don't want to get myself in trouble with this because I work for the Department of Corrections. I fall under standards of conduct issues. And so I don't want to beat up on the director of the Department of Corrections, but I'm going to use an example for what I know best, okay? And there is a program right now where we are feeding 2 meals a day in 3 institutions. I've been piloting that program. And so early, as a dietary manager, I said, I really don't think we're going to be able to save any money in that area. And we've continued to pilot that program. In the meantime, I've been spending more money doing 2 meals a day than doing 3 meals a day. So there's still some things that can be done. I was tasked, to go back to Rod Blagojevich's administration, but I was one of I believe it was 5 dietary managers tasked with cutting $10 million from the dietary budget in the Department of Corrections. We were given 5 years to do that. We did it in 3. And you do that sometimes by, when you start to look at how you're approaching a topic, and you move some things around, simple things in dietary, instead of automatically giving someone vegetables, you ask them if they wanted. That saved almost $80,000. Moving from one shape of a fish to another shape of fish, that was another $60,000. And so I think the mindset with in the legislature sometimes has been, oh, that's not important because that's only worth $20 million. When in reality, if you take $20 million here, you take $52 million from NRI, you take another $40 million from here, all of a sudden you've got big dollars that are coming. So it adds up very quickly. So the audit that I'm referring to is a line-by-line audit, and then looking at what is wasteful and saying that has to go. And sometimes, people attach their ego to a particular program. And so we have to be wise enough and have a personality that's strong enough to say that my ego is not attached to this, that we have to go and do the job, get it done right, and then move on to the next task.
Talk about the job that you have now for the Department of Corrections. Where are you situated at? What specifically do you do? I think it's an interesting job.
Okay. Well, I'm on a leave of absence right now. I've been on a leave since the 10th of July. I wanted to do this full-time and make sure I was available. You can't take your cell phone into a prison, so it makes it hard to run a campaign.
Yeah.
But I'm the dietary manager for Pinckneyville Correctional Center and the DuQuoin Impact Incarceration, or the boot camp in DuQuoin. I have had as many as 4 institutions. I had Centralia for 4 months, also added on to that, and then the Community Correctional Center, the Glass House here in Carbondale. And sometimes they send me to troubleshoot at places. Overall, my job is to manage the dietary department, and that includes the security in there, making sure that my staff goes home alive at the end of the day. So I have to work with security within the institution to ensure that, I also have to ensure that the master menus are followed. Registered dietitian puts those together. It's my job to order the food for it, make sure that everyone follows those menus, and then of course, we have inmates who work in the kitchen, so make sure that my staff is watching the inmate workers and watching waste. And I work as a health inspector basically to be sure that we're following the IDPH codes. And as I said, they sometimes send me to troubleshoot. So a few years back, when we were first cutting these dollars, I was sent along with Jamie Phoenix, who has now passed away, but she was the business administrator, and they told us to go to Menard, and we had 24 hours to find $1 million. So we went to Menard and did just what I said. We moved some things around, simple things we talk about with the vegetables. It's called offer versus serve. That was a $100,000 change for Menard. So when you're talking about 4,000 inmates and 12,000 meals a day, you can find that money. Had to fight some wardens to do that because no one likes to change in an institution. A warden's answer is always, that'll get someone killed. So you have to kind of walk them through the steps and make sure. And I don't think a legislator would say, well, that's not good for my district. Well, it would be good for your district if we're able to cut money overall for the state and we bring jobs back in. Your district might be one of those that benefits most from it. So being able to sit down and talk a warden through some changes where they're convinced that someone might get killed, and you can show them that, no, this is the better way, teaches you tools to use.
This really doesn't have anything to do with your campaign, but you're talking about supervising inmate workers in a kitchen. They don't get to use knives, do they?
Yeah.
They do?
They have knives. In fact, the nice big chef's knives, they're on, they put them on they're on an 8-foot cable, and then they're usually attached to a table that's attached to the floor, or sometimes a clamp on the wall. But I don't like the cables. I actually like, you put them in a room, lock the door. There's plexiglass around the room so you can see what they're doing. When you put the cables on them, now I've given them an 8-foot cable that they can put around my neck while they stab me to death. So I would rather do away with the cables. Those inmates at Pinckneyville, just Pinckneyville alone, there's 3 shifts. So there's about 150 inmates that work in there. And I started as a food supervisor 1. So you have food supervisor 1, food supervisor 2, food supervisor 3, and then dietary manager. And so when you kind of come up through the ranks, you learn to talk to the inmates. You kind of learn the things that your staff might be doing that maybe, you know, that you can catch because you know what they did, or what you did, and you can motivate the inmates a little bit better. I speak their language.
You know, in all these races, we hear from one party that the state has cut every possible expense, and to cut more, we'll just have ruinous services, and the other party says there's lots of waste. I mean, how can there be such a difference between opinions by reasonable people?
I don't know that I can answer that, Gary. I mean, I just know what I look at. I look and I see the waste. So I can't speak for both parties, and definitely can't tell you why there's a difference between the two, other than I know when I see something, you do something about it.
Mm-hmm.
And if it makes sense to me, and it makes sense to me to look at Medicaid fraud, it makes sense to me to look line by line, because that's what my experience has been with a multi-million-dollar budget. You know, as I said, I'm managing just $2.9 million just in food. And a warden doesn't want to hear the excuses of, well, I went over budget. You have to find a way to make it happen. And so if you're tasked with doing something, then you just do it.
So I'm relatively new to being back in Illinois, so I'm still trying to remember all of the tax rate numbers, but as I understand it, nothing happens in the next 3 months, then the temporary tax rolls back to...
I think the corporate tax goes back to 5.
And the personal tax
Yeah,
to
personal to
3,
3 point something.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
All
So
right.
it doesn't roll totally back
Right, doesn't go
to
back
where
to
it was.
3, it
Right,
goes to
right.
3.5 or 3 3/4.
Right. So when we're talking about it rolling back, we're not rolling it back all the
Yeah.
way to where it was before. We are
Right.
keeping a portion of it. But listen, I was raised by a single mom and grandparents. My grandpa was an old German. You know, when we got up in the morning, we went to work. We worked until we went to sleep. And I don't mean, you know, child labor or whatever. We worked in the garden, we did dishes, we did homework, whatever. And there were a few principles in life that my grandpa taught us. Be the first to work, the last to leave, work harder when your boss is not looking than when he is looking, and your word means something. So if I make a promise to you, you know, if I'm saying that to you, it's my bond. That's the way I was raised. And so when you tell the voters, the people of Illinois, the folks that you're supposed to be there to take care of, that this is temporary, it should mean that it's temporary. I think the legislature even skirted that by not making clear to people that the whole thing wasn't temporary. Only a part of it was temporary. Some of it is permanent. And so on that rollback, it needs to sunset. And then we look at places where we can cut fraud. We do the forensic audit, and we bring business in. And if still that doesn't get the job done, then maybe we look at something else. But you can't just go look at something else when you haven't kept your word the first time. That's the problem that we have with government right now, is no one believes them. And, you know, so somewhere you have to draw the line and say, what I say, you can believe.
So we'll assume that those two things are correct, that there is millions upon millions to be found in identifying corruption, and that reduced taxes will stimulate the economy and fill the gap. So between January 1st, when the sun sets, and when these other things have the time to take effect, there's a gap. How do we make it through that gap of time?
Well, there's still I would like to identify where this temporary tax has taken in almost $28 billion. It was supposed to be to pay down bills, and it was supposed to be to pay down the pension. There's $20 billion somewhere. And I've seen Governor Quinn for the last 3 weeks, 4 weeks. He's been all over the state handing out money. There's money somewhere. So I don't believe that we go from January until the economy is stimulated and that all of a sudden there's no money. Because the money's there somewhere for the governor to go around and dole out. And there's $20 billion, give or take, that's unaccounted for. So let's account for that before we assume that we can't make it until the economy begins to turn around.
The campaign, how are you going about things, and what do you think about the flavor of the campaign that is being waged against you?
I began this thinking that you can keep everything clean, and I do believe that there's a difference between what's called mudslinging and negative campaigning. Sometimes there are some negatives that have to be brought to light about one's opponent. The campaign that's being waged against me is a campaign of deception, half-truths, and just out-and-out lies. And it's disturbing when I have my grandchildren and my children watching something and they're shouting at the TV, "That's not true, that's not true, that's not true." And so, of course, you look at it, and I've spent a lot of time knocking on doors and meeting people and saying, look, many of the things that are being said about me go back to the 2015 budget. I'm a non-incumbent. How am I responsible for the 2015 budget? It was a Pat Quinn budget, pushed through by Mike Madigan, and I don't believe it had a single Republican vote on it. So, but not to mention the fact that I'm a non-incumbent. So, I'm not really sure who the allies are that I'm supposed to be siding with, because I haven't had those. I don't know who those allies are. I know what I think. I know what I want to do, and I know that misrepresentation and blatant lies, mistruths, untruths are not really the way to get anything done.
Funding for your campaign,
Mm-hmm.
what are your sources, and
Sure.
are you having any issues getting any funding?
No, I really haven't had any. We've had multiple fundraisers, have great support from local folks, $10, $25, $100, $250. Just this past week, I started the first annual Bryant Booster Club event, and we raised, I believe, close to $10,000 with some sponsorships and just local people who wrote checks. Of course, I'm getting some help from the state party, from the House Republican organization, but a good part of my money has come from the Republican Downstate Caucus. They want someone who has my abilities and the way I think, and I understand my district, and they want me there to be a voice and a presence, and there's, I'm bringing a dynamic to the table that we've never had in this district before. I'll be the first woman to hold the seat, and so I've been getting great support from Representative Wayne Rosenthal and Representative Charlie Meyer and Representative John Cavaletto. So some men in the Republican caucus who known me for years. I've done their golf tournaments and their parades with them, and they've watched me in corrections. Know that I'm a woman who teaches Sunday school, so I have a good heart. But I'm also a woman who doesn't get pushed around. When you work in the environment that I work in, you have to learn very quickly I'm a woman in a man's world, and you just can't be pushed around. But on the other hand, you also can't be a dictator in a prison. It doesn't work. It doesn't work with the staff, and it doesn't work with the inmates. So a lot of my funding is coming from the Downstate Caucus, but most of it is from people here in the district who just really want to have good representation.
On the education front, do you support any of the plans that would rework how education funding is distributed?
Yeah, there's, I think you're referring probably to the formula that's used, and it does need to be worked. Right now, Southern Illinois does not get their fair share. So I'm not advocating that we get, that it's turned upside down, but definitely we need to get our fair share of funding. And, it kind of works in, I think one of your questions on the survey had to do with transportation. It's very different, even the transportation component of education for downstate's very different than in an urban area. In an urban area, there are a whole lot of resources. You can use public transportation. Sometimes the kids are, if they're old enough, they can walk a little bit farther. But in downstate, we have rural areas like, I think, Farrington in the Mount Vernon School District and Trico, in the western part of Jackson County. Those students can't walk to school. There is no access to public transportation. So what happens is, when those are not funded properly, you have to take money directly out of the classroom. And so making sure that the formula is fair, making sure that transportation is funded, and then of course actually appropriating the money for those formulas, because right now the money's not even fully appropriated for the formula that's used. So even saying that the formula changes, if the legislature doesn't appropriate the money for it, the formula itself doesn't solve the problem.
So how will you convince your fellow Republican colleagues in the DuPage counties of the world to that way of thinking?
Yeah, well, as I say, Bill keeps calling me a political insider. I'm a grassroots activist. And so for the time that I've spent working, those relationships in Springfield with coalitions and with the Illinois Lincoln Series, the Lincoln Series opens a whole new door because women network very well. So, I have, say, in the DuPage, Grundy, Will County area, Senator Resin. We have over in another part, Representative Kay Hatcher. In the Macomb area, Representative Noreen Hammond. So those are just some of the women that I can network with. But I've built relationships through the years where I'm able to call. I'll give you an example with just how you can make some phone calls and get some people to just listen to you. The Menard retirees were very concerned about Senate Bill 1. And I'm kind of a go-to person for the Department of Corrections. When somebody says, hey, who can we talk to? I at least know the name of the person to hook them up with. So I said, you know what? I'll take a vacation day. I'll go with you. So I called, I got Bill Brady, Dave Luchtefeld, Matt Murphy, Sue Resin, Christine Rodonio, and just called and said, hey, can you guys help me put this together? I have some retirees that want to come. They just want to tell you what their issues are. And so I took a vacation day, drove them in my car, bought them lunch while we were there. We met, when you come off the floor of the Senate where there's some benches and stuff that kind of are out in a little area out there, we went out, they came off the floor, sat and talked to those folks. So those relationships are there. And the relationships across the aisle have come because, as I said, the Illinois Lincoln Series is the Republican version to help train Republican women to run, but the I Will program is the Democrat side of that. And Southern Illinois Law School has had a program for, I think this will be the 4th year. It's an elective class for law students called, I think it's called Women in Leadership. But I've been invited to be there along with Barb Brown, and I represent the Lincoln Series and the Republican viewpoint, and Barb represents the Democrat version viewpoint and the I Will program. And then we talk to law students, male and female, about leadership and how our parties work. And Barb Brown and I have been able to sit there and we actually work off of each other. Barb will say something and then I say, yeah, it works that way here, or maybe this is how we can work it differently. Our 2 programs were in Springfield at the same time a few years ago, and we got together and said, hey, we want these women to be in the legislature at some point, so they need to be able to work across the aisle. When we're done with each of our programs tonight, let's have them meet someplace so we can all get to know each other a little bit better. So we took about 20 women, met at the same place, and spent about 2 hours listening to music, talking, and built some relationships. Tracy Glenn is an example in Williamson County. So Tracy Glenn and I have bounced ideas off of each other. So you don't have to be totally opposed to each other just because maybe you have a different viewpoint. Sometimes you can sit down and agree to disagree on an issue, but find your common ground. Did that answer your question?
Ish.
Yeah, okay, all right. I think you just wanted to know how am I gonna get the DuPage folks on our page? And, yeah, that's the long way around, yeah, right. Well, but it doesn't matter if it's the school funding formula, or if it's, if it's energy, whatever it happens to be. The problem is that sometimes downstate doesn't understand upstate, and upstate doesn't understand downstate. And you fix that by building relationships. If those relationships are there, you can sit down at a table and you can have a conversation like we're having. And it doesn't have to be confrontational. So in the end, you work out what your differences are, school funding or whatever.
Another thing that's going to come to an end at the end of this year is the Illinois Jobs Now program. And you can see evidence of what that's done, especially in our area, all the road construction, the transportation education center. How does the state go forward after that ends?
Well, I would hope we can come up with a capital bill. And, in order to do that, we have to go back to what we talked about at the beginning. We've got to find the money to do it. And so we'll go back to the forensic audit. We go back to finding the waste and fraud. I'm on the executive board for Labor's 2002. And because that's a local, that's corrections employees. But the overreaching view of laborers as it is electricians and anyone else who wants to be working on these road projects and stuff, capital bill is what it's going to take to fix our infrastructure. Especially here in Southern Illinois when Murfreesboro is kind of an island. If the bridges aren't right in Murfreesboro, you can't get any place in town. When a bridge goes out, you got to go a long way around to get somewhere. Even to Carbondale if you're coming from Murfreesboro. So bridges, roads, and so we need a capital bill. In the capital bill, we need to be looking at two things. Number one, first, safety, making sure that our infrastructure is taken care of. But secondly, we've got to be able to get our goods and services to market, and we've got to be able to get our workforce to work. And so, those projects are going to be important, not only to put people to work, but to make sure that we can move our products here. We've got an enormous amount of agriculture in this area, and when we have poor roads, and I visited Nighthawk Coal a while back, just a couple of weeks ago. They move 24 hours a day. They're moving coal trucks. I saw what happened when there was a little bit of road construction in Chester, and it slowed down the trucks going from Nighthawk to their coal dock, and just slowing that down for a few minutes causes the entire company to back up. So 20 minutes here can actually cost you several hours because now you're backed up at the coal dock too. So just an example of that. Okay.
Anything you wish we had asked you?
I wish you would have asked about my kids and grandkids. I love talking about them.
How are your kids and grandkids doing?
They're doing great. Thanks for asking.
Yeah, tell us a little more.
Sure. Actually, my daughter's in the hospital right now. She's carrying twins, and she's in her 25th week. So we don't want them to come yet, and they're boys. They're trying to get out, and so
She has mixed feelings on the topic.
Yes,
I'm sure.
and so because of that, we actually are keeping our two granddaughters, 7 and 3, and so in the morning, Rick and I have to work out the campaign schedule, and then who's going to drive Aubrey to Salem from Murfreesboro to school every day. So
Wow.
Yeah, so it's and then on top of that, I had jury duty for the last 2 weeks.
Oh.
So I am a great multitasker, and we keep it all. Rick, we've been married for 33 years. I married the guy I've known since I was 12 years old.
Wow.
He was my best friend's big brother. We have had a great life, not easy life. We've worked hard for what we have, but man, it's been fantastic. So I like to talk about my family. I like all women, I'm sure men too, but you get a woman talking about her kids, and we'll be here for about 4 hours at least, so. Yeah. Thanks for asking.
Well, I won't be here for 4 hours, because I'm
All
going
right.
to visit my son in
Oh,
Denver.
nice,
So-
good. Oh, congrats. In Denver?
Yeah.
I love Denver. I found out in Denver, don't ever run uphill, unless you've prepared yourself for that
I
run.
try not to run downhill.
Yeah, okay,
but,
good. I thought my lungs were gonna explode.
Well, thanks a lot for
Thanks for
visiting
having
with
me.
us.
Appreciate
I'm
that.
gonna switch this off and we can all relax a little bit.
Okay.